Hello everyone. I wanted to take a deeper look at Birka on Bjorko Island archaeological site, inhabited by the Scandinavian Norse and later possibly also the Rus people, as we'll see, from the 8th to the 10th centuries AD. Now Birka, along with Hovgarden, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it was here I did a previous video on grave BJ581, the remains of a female shield maiden or Viking female warrior. Was discovered and determined relatively recently. And I came across a doctoral thesis by Dr. Charlotte Hendensterna Jonsson, University of Stockholm, Sweden. And the article was suggested to me for free via academia.edu. I recommend this site. It is a really good resource for graduate students like myself who no longer have access to online databases. And I want to do a video on Dr. Charlotte Hendensterna Jonsson's paper in order to explore the Viking site more fully and its regional context. So Birka is located near Stockholm, Sweden, south of the heart of the Viking pagan world, actually, the Temple of Uppsala. Now, the TV shows Vikings, Valhalla, and the older Viking TV show with Ragnar both featured this temple, and the older Viking show actually depicted human sacrifices there, 9 of every kind, if you're a fan, you'll remember. Now, this image is a 16th century drawing based on a description of the Temple of Uppsala given by the German medieval monk Adam of Bremen, who lived in the 11th century when the temple was destroyed. Here's actually all that's left of the temple now. But the problem is that, just a little digression. Now, these shows and the Christian Europe writ large is largely dependent on these sources, like Adam of Bremen, for information because of who they are and when they wrote them. The credibility of the practices actually taking place is actually dubious at best. However, there is some recent archaeological evidence to suggest that the Scandinavian Norse peoples did engage in human sacrifices. But I'll do another video on that in the future, I think, because Birka on Bjorko Island, Lake Malar region of present-day Sweden contains far more information than the controversy of the BJ581 grave. Now, the site of Birka has several components. It's definitely a multi-component site. First, we have the town ramparts, fortified wall remains, partially built from old boats, actually, begun in the first half of the 8th century AD, and we have a burial confirming that. In addition, we have pile barricades. So this was a stone and earth, wood and stone water defensive structure, a way that they manage incoming boats, trade, taxation, and defended the harbor. Next, we have the borg structure. So the borg, this is a Swedish word for fortress. It contained a hill fort, something unusual for Viking peoples after the 6th century AD. Birka is an exception to this because its Borg fortress has a hill fort with its own rampart and also a garrison structure and a warriors hall located here. We'll be focusing on the material recovered from this structure for most of our inferences today. And finally, we also have numerous vast burial grounds. And here's a satellite picture of just how many graves there are on Birka, around 3,000, and there probably will continue to discover more. And for context, the Birka grave 581, the Viking shield maiden, was discovered north of the garrison structure, making contact with the garrison structure, where the island's wealthiest graves were discovered, highlighted in red here. And this area was also some elite manufacturing was going on here, elite residences, so it was definitely an elite quarter of the Viking inhabitants of the island. The burial that I mentioned earlier, found under the town ramparts, consisted of a man buried with a horse and expensive silk textiles. The remains here have allowed the rampart construction to be dated to the first half of the 8th century AD. Now, the shaft burial picture here is just an example of what a shaft burial is. Spatially, it's from actually a colonial period mortuary assemblage in northern Highland, Ecuador. I couldn't find any images of the shaft burial at Birka, but it's described as a man, a horse, and silk. But this at least gives you an idea of what a shaft burial is. And also gives some credence, I think, to the idea that the Vikings or the Norse colonists here Scandinavian colonists may have practiced forms of human sacrifice. However, no information I'm aware of points to this individual being sacrificed, nor on Birka Island writ large, but it does show an early reverence for the island and its importance, and the importance of the ramparts and the fortifications at Birka from the 750s AD onward. One of the reasons why the site was probably very important was the fact that, if you take a look at Birka and its situation in the Lake Malar, where it's situated, we can see that it is connected to the sea, and it was an important trading post. And so Dr. Charlotte's paper not only explores just the life ways of the people at the island, but also taking a look at their material culture, which was something that was obtained through a lot of traveling. These were quite itinerant people, these Norse colonists here. And we're going to get an idea of the kind of the Rus identity at Birka, and even just looking at the excavations from the Warriors Hall. We can see a photo here of the Warriors Hall on the Borg, the fortified area at Birka. We can see that it's quite exceptional for not only just the information that we have within the hall itself, but also the armor types that we found here are quite exceptional. Comparing the chainmail to laminar armor, that's the squares here, we can see that the site was quite wealthy, and it was connected to a system of fortified trading post forts that held on to political independence in the early medieval period, stationed at places like the Garrison structure, this fortified borg. And when we take a zoom out that we can now, because we have so much archaeological regional evidence, we can connect the island of Birka on Bjorko, the site of Birka on the island of Bjorko, and we can connect it to a vast network of mostly eastern situated trading posts into ancient Russia, the Kievan Rus, all the way south to Constantinople. And when we take a look at the trading map here, so this is a map of the Varangian Guard trade network. The Varangian Guard were the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor. Something that was we can see how closely it resembles the trade relations between Birka and the other sites already mentioned. And the Vikings Valhalla TV show explores this connection. We can see that the Byzantine Empire was so unstable that the emperors had to rely on a foreign Norse mercenary force in order to keep them protected. The TV show Vikings Valhalla also went to Constantinople, showing the Varangian Guard there with the emperor. And the Vikings TV show explored more eastern connections via Prince Oleg and the Kievan Rus Vikings with Ivar the Boneless. And so in addition to the laminar armor, and in addition to that, which is associated with Constantinople, the cavalry archers, a military practice associated with the steppe peoples. And when we look at the territory of the Kievan Rus, we can see that there's a close overlap with all of the sites that Birka was associated with, especially in the 10th century before its conquest by the Christian rulers. But getting at the major themes of what we can see at Birka in terms of identity and who the Rus Vikings there were and what kind of culture they had. Well, when we look at a map or a territory and where Birka was, it's important to note that Birka, before it was conquered by the earliest Christian kings of Denmark, was very much connected to the east, as we can see through river tradeways, connected to Constantinople, but material culture was a sort of a synchronized Eastern and sort of Eastern Roman mixture. And the religion at Birka was also resolutely pagan. And so it was a lot of, we can see that this adoption of, or a refusal to accept Christianity was considered more of a political statement at the time. And it wasn't until the conversion of the Norse people under Harold Bluetooth, where we get the term Bluetooth from, because of the unity that he imposed in the 10th, 11th centuries. We can see that after this king was probably the one responsible for conquering Birka later. But if you want to take a look at the material culture of Birka and what this syncretic sort of Rus Viking uh, material identity was that we have afforded to us now in the archaeological record, taking a look at the Garrison Hall, we can explore some of these themes in a way that's pretty sophisticated, and it enhances our understanding of who these peoples were in the early medieval period. So this is a map of the Garrison, and Dr. Charlotte Henden Sterne Jonsen says that the demise of the garrison in the later 10th century at Birka signaled the end of paganism in the region and the beginning of the dominance of Christianity and the Christian kings in the early Christian medieval states. And so when we take a look at the archaeology of the garrison, we can see that the northwest section of the hall, it was bifurcated off inside, so there were divisions, but no internal walls remain. But the northwestern section is considered to be an elite section. And now there were openings in the ceiling to allow for natural light to come through, similar to this scene, one of the first episodes of the Vikings 2013 TV show. Opposite the elite corner, the northeastern corner was used for storage, evidently, and we can imagine some of the social interactions taking place here, meeting with the elite ruler, the ruler of Birka, holding audiences here. Not now these recreations of halls made in a Viking style. The garrison itself is actually a secondary structure built in the 10th century. There was another structure contemporaneous with the later half of the 7th century burial under the town ramparts. However, in the 10th century, the garrison structure was improved, and it was built. The larger structure was built on top of it. Now, what I thought was really interesting about the remains at the garrison were that along the interior perimeter were a series of padlocks and coffer mounts interpreted as the remains of storage chests that were found. Their absence can be explained by the fact that the garrison was sacked by the early Christian kings in the 10th century. But this has important social implications for understanding the role of the warrior, because if we contrast the north eastern corner, which is sort of a common storage area, and we see that there were these private storage areas throughout the interior perimeter of the garrison, the interpretation is that the warriors who garrisoned the garrison retained a sense of individual ownership, despite being in a sort of military force. And this brings up the difference that I wanted to talk about. That's the difference between a warrior and a soldier. And I wanted to contrast the soldiers of ancient Rome with something that I think we're seeing at the Birka garrison here, and what was different about a warrior versus a soldier. So yes, the warriors in a shield wall, like in the Last Kingdom series here, of course, discipline, a chain of command, these were all very important, also, as well as trusting each other. But I wanted to make a comparison just with HBO's Rome, the first episode, The Lost Eagle, with Titus Polo and Lucius Vorenus. I remember this illustrates the point very well, I think. Fight against the Gauls. It was Polo who broke formation, and Lucius Vorenus, being a centurion, ended up punishing Polo, and Polo ended up in jail. And I think this gets at to the idea that in a soldier-based army, acts of individual bravery had to be subordinated. It's like the soldier army of Rome. These weren't really tolerated. However, individual acts of bravery, like breaking away and doing something crazy to intimidate the enemy, under certain circumstances, these were more acceptable in a warrior-based army like existed at Birka. Warrior-based armies also have more rituals that are meant to cement social bonds, but on a more cooperative sort of basis, egalitarian basis, as opposed to a strictly top-down, regimented army structure. And feasting events were part of these rituals. and we see that at the Garrison. Now mentioned is that the meat, the idea that the Norse people, these Norse colonists, ate predominantly meat is actually a false image, but it's an image that the people themselves cultivated deliberately. They ate predominantly dairy actually, but they tended to preserve the cows as long as possible. Now, there's another video that can be done about the retwines of these Viking Rus leaders and the social aspect. And exploring that would definitely be its own thing. But let me say before going any further, because I mentioned HBO's Rome, the late great Ray Stevenson, very sad to hear of his passing in 2023, right in the prime of his career. Just huge condolences, to his family and everyone. Very sad. Now, in terms of the religion, so as mentioned, the Garrison Birka was resolutely pagan. This is Thor's hammer amulet found in the region. And Dr. Charlotte Hendon Stirne Jonsson says that the island itself was dedicated to Odin, Thor, and Freya. Now, along with on the interior of the garrison, there were swords hanging from the walls, thought to have hung from the walls, which on the sword scabbard bore, that's the part you put the sword in, an eagle design and a bore style was found repeatedly. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of this, but it's thought that the leader of Birka was represented by this symbol, the symbol of an eagle. In terms of Christian iconography found there's actually only one instance of something, a Christian artifact found there, and it was a sword bearing the mark of Harold Bluetooth, which was found under one of the posts at the garrison, so not hanging from one of the walls, it's thought, but actually having been buried under a post. Now, Charlotte Hendon Stirne Jonsson interprets this as an act of defiance. So because a lot of the swords were thought to primarily feature on the walls for easy access, so for also a point of pride, probably. However, this Christian sword associated with Harold Bluetooth was buried underneath a post. So is this an act of defiance? Is this an act of symbolically defeating one's enemies? We're not sure, but it does seem to be the only Christian artifact found on Birka. In addition to the swords found at the garrison, there's also, especially in the graves, mounted cavalry saddles are found. So this is a steep tradition, cavalry archers. And if we compare the amount of arrows found at Birka with other sites, we can see that Birka had an unusually large amount of arrows. So the tradition of cavalry, mounted cavalry, was pretty strong at Birka. In terms of dress, kaftan dress was found here. So this type of clothing is Eastern. It can be made of silk or other materials. We see in the Vikings TV show Prince Oleg wearing this kind of style. It's considered the traditional dress of Russian and Ukrainian, so Slavic peoples. Also, the Ottomans wore this. The Ottoman Emperor Suleiman the Magnificent. In addition to that, we have belts and pouches. Although most similar to the Gotland region in Sweden, even the pouches and we have there are also of an Eastern influence. But we have the art of bore, which is popular on Birka. This sort of art is more of a North Scandinavian, intricate patterns, sort of abstract geometric patterns similar to Celtic art, I would say. This is also found at Birka. So now a lot of the belts, pouches, the saddles, a lot of these ended up as grave goods. And if we make a comparison in the region, we can see that this grave practices at Birka closely resemble the Ladoga area in present-day Russian Federation. So we can see that the Slavic peoples have influences, and we can see taking together, the Slavic influences, the more Eastern steep influences, and the influence from Constantinople, the synchronicity of cultures that led to the Rus identity in the 10th century. And that's something that Christina Hinton Stirne Jonsson is really getting at with her research. Now, Charlotte Hindenstierna Janssen makes it clear that Birka and its unique place in the world in the 10th century and its connection to the East, Slavic peoples, Constantinople, a lot of this was contingent on the other more closer geographic powers to Birka, like Denmark, being weak and not consolidated. So with the arrival of Harold Bluetooth and the unity of a Christian power close to Birka geographically, it spelled the end for the unique sort of Rus Viking presence on Birka. And this also spelled an end for paganism as it was practiced on Birka at that time. In terms of the Birka Shield Maiden BJ581 grave there, what I think when we take a look at the material evidence on Birka, and Charlotte Hindenstierna Janssen states that there's an absence of a lot of material culture associated with women in the Norse world, and there's been a recent excavation of an elite female grave in Norway, and more comparisons with the sort of material normally associated with an elite female from that region. I think a comparison can help really solidify inferences here, but I think the evidence does point towards that. Yeah, she was in fact a warrior, because Charlotte Hindenstierna Janssen is very critical of the idea of interpreting swords as symbols of power, but really we should look at the Birka grave as emblematic of a militant attire, and so interpreting the Birka grave correctly as a warrior, especially in the context of the total martial context of Birka and the garrison, keeping in mind that the grave was found in contact with the garrison structure. I think there is in fact more evidence that yes, in fact this was a female Viking warrior from the 10th century. So, in all, these have been my thoughts. Big thank you to Dr. Charlotte Hindenstierna Janssen, and I hope you found this interesting. I hope this was more context for the Birka grave, and I encourage you to read the articles that I have attached here. Make your own inferences. Let me know what you think in the comments. Or anyway, thank you for listening to me. Kyle Link, archaeologist. Take care.